Hey, it's Candia Raquel, founder of Centro de Poder, and you are at the Sensual Sessions podcast, the place to explore moving completely free from inhibition, delighting on your senses. And today we have a very special guest. This is Jamie Cawelti. I knew about her because she was hosting the Give and Consent podcast, and she's been a key piece in sex positive world. So welcome, Jamie.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about sex positivity today.
Yeah, let's talk about sex positivity. But first, tell us a little bit about your story. Like, how did you become interested on the topic of consent? Why it's important in sex positivity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that consent is one of the most important things that I have found in teaching and my own personal development. I was raised in a very religious family, so lots of rules around, listening to my elders and following those rules, and one kind of way about how relationships work, and the whole point of life kind of laid out ahead of me. So that didn't work for me as well. And of course, I ended up in a relationship where there was abuse going on, and I was kind of set up for that because I wanted to just be a doormat and, get into relationships that were all about just getting married and not really about like what I actually wanted from a relationship. Turns out this happens to a lot of women and just folks in general. And I got introduced to sex positive culture through a friend of mine. And they brought me to this meeting where we talked about self-care and the importance of confidentiality and those that you're around and how we speak about each other. And then this concept of consent, which for me was all about, being able to connect with people in a way that I actually wanted to, feeling like I could set my boundaries, which was really a new concept for me. And I found that to be really important when it came to personal empowerment, like getting into a relationship I actually want to be in order to set boundaries around food or with family or with friends, with my time, my energy. And I can just show up so much more fully in my own life and really do the work that is my heart work and my purpose. And that's why I teach people about consent and boundaries, because by and large, people are just not very good at knowing what they want, asking for what they want, saying no to things that they don't want. And this really disempowers them and makes it so we're constantly giving and giving and giving, like giving from an empty bucket. So I am just obsessed with this work because I'm still learning how to set good boundaries with people. And I just love being in a space where I can teach that to others.
Wow, this is so important because, yeah, like we are actually educated to give and overgive. Like, especially as women, we are supposed to be enablers, like to
Oh,
let
yeah.
people take from us and let them take from us. Like if that was our duty, and you would be like glorified on heaven as a martyr, but
Mm-hmm.
way, no? And what about life? What about taking a moment to even ask yourself if you actually know what you like, what you don't like, and what you want, and what you're gonna do about it? Because in my case, like I've been an expert on expecting people to read my mind and to please,
Mm.
and it's been so hard to ask for what I want because I'm afraid that they are gonna leave, and there are
Right.
people that actually leave. We had a conversation last year that was like life changing for me because you told me about setting boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
like the word no is a single concept, paragraph, book. Like you don't need to
Yeah.
then explain yourself, like placing your hand and say no. And that has already saved me from two instances of aggression and abuse from close people, because here in Mexico, like we are educated on enabling close people, relatives, to do what they want with us. Like, since we are little, like, you should kiss grandpa,
Mm-hmm.
or go with your uncle, or whatever. Like, even if there is no, say, radical things as sexual abuse, like, there's an abuse in not doing what we want and being afraid afterwards. And the interesting thing is also, like, to develop some self love in a radical way, as you set boundaries, because people, at least here around me, don't take boundaries very well. Like, there was one lady that told me that I should dedicate myself to something else when I got my knee fractured. Like, she
Mm-hmm.
knew I couldn't teach Pilates anymore nor dance while I was with a groin to ankle cast. And she was like, no, you gotta start thinking and act quickly on what are you gonna make a living from, because you cannot work as you used to work. And I remember when you told me, like, the boundary, and
Mm-hmm.
it, she actually um she actually felt more close than she should have been from me. Like, I should have implemented micro boundaries before, but at that moment I told her, like, uh even politely, thank you for your opinion, but please don't tell me about your advice on my professional life. And
Mm-hmm.
this lady, like, tried to reinstate her opinion several times, until I had to place my hand literally on her face and told her, stop, stop. And then she ended the connection. Like, she won't speak to me at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, like, it's super hardcore to set boundaries. And
Yeah, and people don't always respond to it very well because they're used to people just kind of rolling over. They go, "Why'd you say no?" And they'll try and convince you to just do it their way. I thought it was really interesting you brought up about young people and how in our families we're just kind of like, children should be seen and not heard. Do what your parents tell you, and like, okay, there's a time and place. Like sometimes, like you got to eat your dinner, you got to go to school, but we're forced to do all kinds of things when we're kids that we don't actually want to do, especially around like hugging your uncle or eating food you don't want to eat. And this kind of general concept that kids should be ordered around. The thing is, we carry that into adulthood when our boundaries are not respected when we're kids. And you start to not recognize when you don't want to do things. And that's part of what makes us so agreeable as adults, because we don't even recognize that your body is telling you, I don't want to do this, because your whole life it didn't matter. You had to do it anyway. And that's a lot of what I teach in the boundaries class, including the no is a complete sentence. That's it. No is enough.
no,
So
no,
I'm glad.
no, no, it's enough. Yes, like, it's very challenging to go past all that conditioning, because you start to even question who you are, like, to grow aside from the story and the narrative that you are expected to keep on talking about. And one of the threads of that story is being agreeable. And that reminded
Mm-hmm.
me of this Dr. Gabor Mate, that he he mentioned a formal study of in a hospital researching terminal patients of chronic degenerative diseases. and like the correlation of mortality with agreeableness. And almost
Mm.
90% of people that was naturally agreeable died. And from that percentage, most of them were women. So like agreeableness can be like deadly. Agreeableness can become deadly. And it was like, yeah, like the patients that say everything yes, yes, yes to the doctor and are okay with everything, like they end up yeah, with very, very bad. And
Is
you
this like patients who aren't asking follow-up questions, or like they're more likely to just say yes to whatever they're told instead of asking like, well, why is that? And making more informed choices? Because that's scary.
uh, I don't remember the details of this story, but it was like about being compliant without asking or wanting to know more or giving a second thought, like, okay, I'm gonna do what the doctor says in, or actually what, e- like the insight was that these people not
Okay.
only did what the doctor said, which is actually good, but they did what everyone told them to do. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
completely agreeable. And you mentioned the key of agreeableness, that is being disconnected to your sensations and your body, and essentially being disconnected to yourself to a point that you don't really know if you're, if it's you who is agreeing to that, or in actuality it's your forced, unquestioned, unexamined education that you are complying with by agreeing with that. So
Mm.
it's becoming blurry. It's forgetting, yeah, it's self-abandonment. And I mean, I even feel uncomfortable of saying this because I know I should be agreeable and I shouldn't be talking about this. And women are not attractive if they say no, and even no means yes and yes means anal. There's like like a meme saying that. And actually people, and oftentimes men that are abusive, have this kind of mentality of bypassing feminine boundaries. So it's like
Yeah, that's kind of a story retelling culture also, like you look at any Harrison Ford movie, it's like, she's just playing coy. She wants you to force yourself on her. And that comes, it's this concept that we also force on men about like, this is what a real man is. So our culture tells us, like, I think that there's a lot of like want to like say, oh, it's me. And I have internalized this, but really it's our culture that's informing us that this is how it should be, and like so many things in our culture, it's very toxic for us, and we don't recognize it because it's like this big concept. There's not one thing we can point at. So it becomes about like what's wrong with me, but it's also like what is the story our culture is telling us, and do we actually agree with that? Because I'd hate to just like generalize it to all men or kind of this way when it's like, but our culture is telling them a story about how that's how they ought to be, whether they like it or not.
yeah, like if you want to become, to become someone and have a place in this culture, so you can belong to this culture, you have to abide by this expectation of being agreeable, saying yes when you mean no, and never saying no. So what I found, and many people have found, is that the moment that you start speaking your truth, you get unfollowed by your aunts on Facebook, and you get like expelled from your high school group of married ex-friends, and maybe you can get kicked off from your job, and like, yeah, like you're faced to your social reality of who's really there for you, for who you truly are. And I mean, rejection is super hard. So, do you have an advice to like be able to afford setting boundaries, meaning that you have a way to cope with rejection and maybe isolation or not belonging to something that hurts you?
I think where I would start is you're talking about family members, and like family members is a really hard one. But so I want to speak more to like the friends that you can't set boundaries with. That's really difficult for me because I consider that in a really important part of someone respecting me. You know, if I tell you, you know what, I absolutely do not have the energy to, you know, go to dinner tonight like we planned to. And I want, it's not you, I just want to reschedule. That's setting a boundary. That's saying I don't have the energy. And if someone comes to me and wants to make me feel guilty about that, or like something is wrong with me, that's really disrespectful of my feelings. It's really disrespectful of my energy. It's disrespectful of my other relationships and commitments, including my commitment to resting and recharging so that I'm prepared for other things in life. So when a friend instead says to me, like, thank you for being honest about where you're at, they might negotiate something different. Like, what if we just came over and watched a movie? Offering me something that's a lower energy option, you know, or just being like, but it's totally cool, we can reschedule. That person has made me feel secure. They've made me feel loved. They've made me feel heard. Those are the relationships I want in my life. So if a friend is going to take a little time boundary, no, like that, or, you know, we were supposed to do something at this time, but I actually have less time, or I have less energy, or what have you. If someone is forcing me to still do it, that's not consensual. It's going to make me tired. In my world, I might start resenting that person if I force myself to do it anyway. Like, there's all kinds of reasons to not set boundaries with people, but the ones who hear and respect boundaries, those are the people I feel safe with. And that's really a word I think of often, especially for those like me who've been through some shit in relationships, is if someone is making you feel unsafe, that's a red flag. If someone makes you feel safe, it is probably because they've heard those boundaries, and you can take that as a green flag from that person because it means you can be vulnerable. You can be your authentic self. And those are the relationships I really want. With family members, we do a little more negotiating because if you're like me, I'm never going to cut off family members, but I'm not always 100% in my yes either with them. And that's okay. I've made that choice. So it's a question of like, how intimate do you want your relationships to be? And do you want to feel empowered? Do you want to feel like you're getting more from your relationships than you're giving away? That's kind of my test for relationships. I have a sister who's a therapist who says all relationships should be 50-50. And I go, no. If I'm being authentic and that feeds me, that's incredible. That's a relationship I really want to feed.
Yeah.
So to answer the question?
Yes. Yes, because it sort of gives you like the thermometer to measure where you're at and the other person at a relation. Like if it's a real relation to start with, like if you are really relating, or there's like isolation and the other person is having their way at the cost of the one person. So also like assuming responsibility not only for yourself but also for the other one, understanding that if you don't set the boundary and you don't make sure the boundary is respected, you're gonna end up resenting the person. So like there's no way you can fully be agreeable without falling into hypocrisy. Like if I tell you yes when I want to say no, I am actually lying to yourself, to the
Right.
other person. And
Yeah.
the other person, it's not connecting with my real self. So then there's like, there's a match on lack of integrity, starting with own personal integrity. So it's tremendously important to check on yourself, where you're at, and communicate that. And the key that lighted in my clarity was that you're not actually telling the other person that you don't want to see the other person, or that the other person is not important for you by setting the boundary. You're just sharing your real state and ability to be there at that moment with and for the other person, which is very different. It's not that I don't want to see you, it's that I am now coming from an empty bucket. I need to refill myself so we can meet. Right. There's something to share. Or, okay, we can negotiate and you can come and watch Netflix with me and recharge with me. And actually, like, I went through quickly with a few of my relations, meaningful friendships, lifelong friendships. And it is as if the actual glue that connects two people in the relation is going through the trials of being able to be together. It's like there's always an impasse. Like if there's a misunderstanding and you're about to cut that person out or yell at that or whatever, and if the both of you are able to invent something else and resolve that problem that often comes with a boundary, then the connection is strengthened. It's right because it comes from sincerity and authenticity, and at the same time the caring for the other person.
Yeah. And on the other side of that, and like on the rejection side, like we don't like being told no. You're like, I really want to do this, and you're saying no to me. What do I have to do to convince you to want to do the thing? So that's the other half of consent that we teach to people, is just not take it personally. Like the chances are, if you're saying no, I don't want to do something fun that we plan to do together, it's probably not me that I'm suddenly not fun anymore. It's probably you're tired, or something tragic happened, or work's been crazy, or you have an injury, and maybe you're not wanting to go into all those details right now. So like teaching people to be cool is how I put it. Be cool about it. Just if someone says no to you, like, don't freak out. It's gonna be okay. And don't take it personally. But then also sometimes outright saying no, there's a lot of us who have also, like, we've not received the best reaction when someone has said no, and it can be scary to say no to somebody. Something you mentioned earlier made me think about wanting to mention kind of the trauma response we can have. If you've ever tried to set a boundary with somebody, or you go, well, we were just making out and I didn't like it very much, and I wish it was more like this. If you've ever had an experience like mine, that didn't land very well, and maybe that person got really angry and yelled, or never wanted to ever kiss you again. So you can end up, because we're feelings, we're feelers, really. We have an amygdala. You have a brain like I do. It's designed the same kind of way, in that those feelings of not feeling safe, that feeling of rejection, that feeling of, if I ask for what I want, they're not going to kiss me anymore, that kind of gets stuck in your brain. So the next time you want to go to somebody and say, hey, we were kissing and I really wish it was a little different than that. Like if you're like, I really just wanted it to be passionate, you're giving me little pecks, I don't like it. But I really like you. It teaches you not to have that conversation. And that's a really vulnerable place to be. Where you can also end up is in a triggered response where, we hear of like fight or flight, like, whenever something triggers you and it's scary. We also in our culture talk about the fawn response, which is kind of like that deer in headlights, like, yeah, whatever you want. I'll just do it your way. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Where you're just wanting to please somebody to the point where they're not going to bother you anymore. You just agree with it till you have to go. And we also talk about the freeze response, where it's just kind of similar to fawn, where you might more freeze and be like, I'm just gonna let this happen until it's over. I don't know if I can say this one. There's the fornicate, I'll say, in case it's going on YouTube. The fornicate response, where you actually please to the point of having sex so that you can get out of a situation. Those are trauma responses. They happen because we're scared.
Yes.
And not the other person may not recognize they're even happening. So then we can check in with each other. We can use more words. When we can make space for no, or can we go slower? It actually gives us much more authentic relating. And I'm sure you've talked about mindful breathing on this before. When we do end up in a trauma or triggered place with somebody, and maybe they are a really healthy, good person, good about hearing no, it helps us do some deep breathing because it actually will bring back your higher brain function, get you back into your parasympathetic nervous system, and out of that sympathetic stress response. So there are ways to come back out of this. If you're listening to this going like, oh my God, I always have that response. I don't know what to do about it. There's a whole boundaries class where we talk about what to do. We teach in Sex Positive World. I'm teaching it this weekend, actually.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, we need to know more about all the responses and to notice which our responses are coming from past traumas and say like, oh, I have some stuff to work out. And I 100% relate with the fun response because I am not into slapping people in the face, but I am very like to play as if nothing happened and then ghosting. Or well, like send a message like, I wish you great success on your life and then disappear.
Yeah.
Because of not being able to communicate what I wished it was different or to suggest something, even though it may be someone I really like. And I mean, I also been like ruthless. One time I told my boyfriend at the time, like why can you recover more quickly? Like go away and come back when you're hard. And I mean, that was the last time I saw him. And now I was like, I was like a macho woman. Like I was like so disrespectful and untactful. And I mean, it was true, but I didn't express like I spoke those words in a way that that was coming from a lack of consideration for the other person. And of course, sexual criticism is horrible. Like even the best feedback, I think it can be devastating. And
general rule, give feedback not in the bedroom, not right after the sex. Okay. Give a little space so people are not in that afterglow state. Just to say there's a time and place, and it's not right after. Go ahead.
Thank you for introducing that very important common sense recommendation that is better.
I don't know if that's common sense.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good to be aware of that and like pick it up maybe 2 days afterward, like with a brunch and like, hey, I wanted to share with you something. Like, yeah, in a way that involves the other person, in a way that is caring and not only from a personal standpoint, but from a personally informed we standpoint. Like we are making this together. So there are two parts. I felt this, but this thing that I felt is happening to both of us because I am part of
Mm.
the, or the three of us if it's a three thing, or many forms. But yeah, it's so important to know about boundaries. So
Yeah.
could you share with us another little tip that we can take with us and remember to practice boundaries as a self-care?
Yeah, definitely. I'll say this because we're kind of talking about dating, finding partners. And that's a lot of what I talk to people about. So I'm polyamorous, I'm kinky here and there, and part of community. And one of the number one things that I see with people when they set their boundaries, like for one, when you start setting boundaries, you will realize you want to set more. And the first one will be scary. So like that fear is a good sign. Unless you're like your life is in danger, fear is generally good for you. You know, do what feels doable today to be like, I'm gonna go on a date and it's gonna go like this. Like setting your boundaries in advance about what you're open to, what you're not open to. On self-care, I also think about what kind of self-care you do for yourself. You really want to like yourself before you're introducing new people into your life. So I'm talking about like, you know, like I love a nice bath. I love candles. I love things that make me feel girly because I had the same thing where I had like lots of masculinity growing up. So if something makes me feel girly, I go for that. Just whatever self-care is for you. If it's cooking a nice meal, if it's taking the time to actually do that journaling or read that book, like put it in your calendar like it's date night just for you. So for starters, like yourself. Um, then for two, think about like things that have worked in past relationships or things that you wish were in your relationship. So if you want to feel a certain kind of way, is when I put like, I want to feel like I belong in a group. I want to feel like I'm desired. I want to feel like I'm being nurtured and taken care of. And what you want in your relationships may be different. Like maybe you want to be doing the nurturing. Maybe someone cooking for you is really important. So think about those things that you actually want in a relationship and use feeling words, not just like practical things. Because, like I said earlier, we're feeling creatures. And then also identifying like green flags and red flags. I think a lot of times when we talk about relationships, when we talk about dating, we talk about the red flags. And I'm sure anyone listening to this, you know some red flags to look out for. But also think of like what would be the opposite? What would be a green flag for you? So if you can say no to somebody and they're cool, they're supportive of it, they're curious, I'd call that a green flag. So that would be my answer to this. Is say for one, take time for you and the things that make you feel good, or whatever words work for you. If they make you feel girly, if they make you feel nurtured or whole, get outside. Yeah, it's wintertime here in Portland right now, so going outside feels like silly advice a little bit, but also like getting outside is important to actually connect with nature because on top of being feelings machines, we're earthlings. So we'd like to be connected to earth. Um, yeah, and then also identifying for yourself, like what are your green flags and red flags? I highly recommend journaling and keeping track of these things because when you start identifying green flags in other people and the things that make you feel good, for one, you'll start automatically doing the things that make you feel good. You won't have to think about it as hard. And then for two, if you know what green flags to look for, you will actually start to notice them in other people. So this idea of like, the things that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. If you look for red cars, suddenly you realize red cars are everywhere and you didn't even realize before. You're just changing what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, changing what you're paying attention to. So just a quick recap. The first
Mm-hmm.
is to acknowledge your sense of safety, where you feel
Yeah.
safe. That's like, that's it. That's where you want to be. And then like yourself first before engaging with other people. Like make sure that if you're into taking hot showers, cooking for yourself, candles, you like to be girly or you want to be a wild cowboy or whatever, like
Yeah.
make sure you're not standing from an empty bucket, but from liking yourself, so you have yourself to share with, and then notice what worked in previous relationships, and that's how you can become aware of, okay, this is something that I like, which leads us to the red flags and green flags. Like really, like be very frontal about that. You already know what's a red flag and how things go if you go down that path. And for me, it's like key to be more aware of the green flags and give myself permission to ask for what matters to me, in spite of the risk of rejection. Because, I mean, if I really need to cook for someone because nurturing and caring for my beloved it's my love language or whatever, or I really need the other person to cook for me, otherwise I feel abandoned or whatever, like,
yeah.
Those are my green flags, and so important to not be agreeable to red flags, because that is relating from inner dishonesty and then engaging into a bad cycle. So yeah, let's go for self-love, self-care, self-knowledge. Be an earthling going out into the chilly Portland weather.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tell us about your boundary workshops. Do you give boundary coaching as well? Like, what would be like the entry point to know more about how to practice good boundaries and how to be sex positive?
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work with Sex Positive World. I'm the executive director of Sex Positive World, as well as the local chapter here in Portland, Sex Positive Portland. We're in a lot of big cities around mostly the United States, but all over the world. So we've got a fairly large chapter in Los Angeles. We're also in Utah and South Florida, in Nashville and Belgium, kind of all over the place. So what is it? We basically teach people how to build sex positive community and maintain them physically. So here in Portland, we teach a set of classes, and we also teach them online with Sex Positive World that get us all speaking the same language and starting to learn about this boundary setting. Because like we've talked about, it's just really not how our culture is set up. We are set up to live under these certain stories that disempower us. So we start with an intro to sex positivity that we call orientation, just talking about like, how did we get here when it comes to sex negative culture, which I would say is the culture we currently live in. If you're in the United States, and I'm 36, if you're my age, this is the first time you've lived in a post Roe v. Wade world not being a thing. Like, that's the reality of sex negative culture that we are seeing before our eyes just unfolding. So we start with orientation, then awesome boundaries around the world, which we talk about these cultural influences. We actually practice saying no to each other. We practice negotiating. We talk about like who is responsible when things don't go well. That is a 3-hour-long workshop. And I teach that once a quarter. Like each of these classes is one a month. So every 4 months, there's one of these classes. We also teach the pleasure talk, which is, okay, if you want to have a sexy encounter with somebody, what do you even talk about before you get to that point? Because in our culture, we kind of have this like, oh, you just get in the bedroom and you figure it out. You know, no training required. Well, what about the intimacy? What if someone's kinky? What if someone likes their hair pulled? What if someone definitely does not want their hair pulled? Like, what are the pieces of that conversation? And last, we have a class called Sexy Intersections, where we talk about those pieces of our culture that have to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, if you have a disability, how does that affect how you interact with the world when it comes to being a sexual creature, or when it comes to race, or to where you are in the world, or if you are an immigrant, or if you speak the language of the place where you live? Like, we cover a lot of topics. this basically gives us the same understanding of when we say boundaries, when we say consent, when we say sex, what does that even mean?
Yes.
So these 4 classes are offered once a month. My vision for Sex Positive World is to actually turn those into videos so that people can come by our website, sexpositiveworld.org, and have access to those classes anytime. Basically, if you have an internet source, you can just watch those classes, you can learn it, you can review it, you can come back to it and see how am I doing, because I teach this boundaries class probably monthly between doing it in person and online. I learn something new every single time. And we also host discussion groups. We host practice. We host things like cuddle parties where you know the energy is going to stay in that nurturing, platonic touch place. Clothes are staying on. It's not one thing leads to another. And that can be really healing when you can hold those boundaries in a sweet space with people. So we're actually helping people re-empower themselves after that power has been taken away. And I've seen a lot of healing come from it. I'm starting to collect stories from people, and it's just really inspiring. And yeah, I love doing this work. I love helping people to actually set boundaries in their life.
Yes, helping people to take their power back after they've been disempowered. This is so important because that's the culture we still live in. And
Yeah.
I'm really so full with admiration for what you're doing, for your work, your persona, your endeavor, because you are supporting the growth of a sex positive culture that is a culture of inclusion, of respect, of integrity, of healing, of true love, of integrity. So really, really, really thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world and for sharing little bit a little flame of this fire that you're tending to with the Essential Sessions podcast. Jamie, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and essentially, please go to sexpositive.org to learn more about,
It
yeah,
is sexpositiveworld.org.
sex positive world.
We hunt the whole world.
Yeah, well, that's the goal. You can be part of it.
Yeah.
sexpositiveworld.org and learn more about setting boundaries, about self-love, about owning your desire, about vocalizing your desires, your preferences, and welcoming this bliss, this fleshly bliss that is being alive, especially on intimacy, sharing yourself with other or with others. Yeah. So
Excellent.
yeah. So Sensualist, if you haven't subscribed already to the Sensual emails, please go to www.centraldepoder.com and get yourself signed up to get a Sensual Session podcast episode delivered weekly on your inbox. And until next time, remember to sense your fire so you can share the flame.